Tonight we're pleased to continue the VASD program's Collapsing Time series with London-based video artist Sophie Clements' lecture and exhibition titled Attempting to Delay the Inevitable. This series challenges the structural limitations of time by flattening past and present through creative models in order to generate new experiences and visions for the future. This evening, we'll first hear from our artist about her work, leaving time for a very brief Q&A after her presentation. And then we'll open up the galleries on either side of the auditorium to view her exhibition, in which she will be in attendance and you can ask any additional questions. Sophie Clements' work occupies a space between filmmaking, sculpture, and sound. She studied biochemistry at the University College London and holds a master's degree in communication design from the Royal College of Art. And she's also a percussionist. Solo exhibitions of her work have occurred in galleries and museums internationally, including the Barbican Centre in London, the Victoria and Albert Museum, also in London, Dolby Headquarters in San Francisco, the Seoul Museum of Art in South Korea, and the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Oslo, among others. Clements' interdisciplinary work with music includes collaborations with composer J. Peter Schwalm, electronic musician and composer Scanner, and the contemporary music ensemble Icebreaker. These collaborative and cross-disciplinary works have been shown in international venues, including the Science Museum and the Royal Opera House in London, FACT Liverpool, Punkt in Norway, the Dublin National Concert Hall in Ireland, and on Hamburg North German radio. Sophie teaches at Central St. Martin's School of Art in London, is visiting faculty at the Guildhall School of Music, and the joint artistic director of the MAP, Music, Arts, and Performance, Making Project, a cross-disciplinary project with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, Barbican Creative Learning, and Central St. Martin's School of Art. Clements won the Jerwood Moving Image Prize for Film and Video in 2008. So it was a natural fit for us to include Clements in our Collapsing Time series. As a video artist, time is part of the very material of her work. And the investigation of and fiddling with time are central to two of her major influences, science and experimental music. Clements' meticulous analog process, which functions similar to stop-motion animation, is a laborious and long method which produces a short video. And while the duration required to make these works is lengthy, the objects she captures function on an opposite time scale, capturing quick, transitory states of explosions, water in motion, breaking glass, and erupting dust. She then creates extended videos of these singular twinkling moments, stretching time almost to the point of total suspension. Preserving these evanescent moments in what she calls temporal sculptures allows us to hold a cloud of smoke or a figure of water, offering a unique experience not normally available to us, the ability to experience time as an object. Please join me in welcoming Sophie Clements.
So, when I got the email from Gretchen about coming to talk to you about collapsing time, I thought it's kind of uncannily similar to how I tend to talk about my work. You see, what I love about working with the moving image is that we can control time. We can slow things down, speed things up, chop it up, put it together in a new way. And so what I like to do is find these really complicated ways at looking at this really simple material and somehow find a way or a system to deconstruct time, put it back together again in a way that lets me look at a material in a kind of unnatural time frame. And so then I'm hoping always that something will come out of that or will reveal something of the material itself or something other, something poetic maybe. No. So because this idea of collapsing time is so kind of integral to my actual process and the way I make work, I thought the only thing really I can do here is to actually talk to you about how I make the work and the ideas that go into it. I don't have a fancy presentation for you. I'm just going to be dragging things onto the screen. Hope that's all right. So what I'm going to start with, what I'm going to do really is give you a quick overview of pieces of work that I've made in the last few years, just quickly with images. Then I'll talk a little bit about background, as Gretchen mentioned, in science and music, and how that works with the idea of collapsing time and how it influences my work. And then I will talk about some pieces in more detail. Now, usually when I talk about my work, I have to split it into these two sort of sections, because there's another whole side of my practice which is to do with what is collaboration with composers and working with live performance. Something that I'm super, super passionate about and I love dearly, but that is not so relevant to tonight. So like Gretchen mentioned, I've been making these so-called video sculptures. Some of the things I'm going to show you images of are stills from works that I'm going to talk about, some of the work that we're showing here, and some are just actual still photographic images. But I just want to give you an overview so you see the types of materials that I've been working with. So this is an explosion, clearly. This is from the piece Thereafter that is showing in that gallery. This is water, as you can see. It was from a water balloon, popped midway. Wood. There was a point when I thought I wanted to make something that had a bit more colour in it, something that was a bit more sort of joyful. So I did this photo series with pieces of coloured acrylic. It was just square pieces that I threw and threw, and gradually over time they broke up. And what I love about making this kind of work is that I wouldn't design something like this. This is the materials doing their thing, and I just get to capture it. And that's something very important to me, this sort of chance operation thing. Yeah, having these wonderful kind of surprises from the material. That was, so this is a photo series that I made after making this, which was a film. Just a little study, quick study. This is a piece of glass, just on the moment of impact. I made this for my friend's album cover. What I like about this particular moment is that it's reflecting the window, basically. So that's the sort of window in a bit of a building. That's why you've got the blue. Sorry, I've had a bit of a cold recently, so my voice might go a bit funny sometimes. So that's another piece of glass. Again, the thing that you've seen. This has been a bit overused, this image. I mean, not just here, I mean, this is, anyway. I'm getting a bit bored of seeing this image. So yeah, this is, these are from Shall I This Time Hold You, which is a recent piece that I'll talk about in a bit. It's a gunpowder explosion, basically. And this is the most recent piece, which is concrete. Again, I'm going to talk about this in a second. These pieces are usually shown large scale. It's important to me that the work has a sort of large physical presence. I mean, it's nice to see it on the internet, but it's a different kind of thing when you're stood in front of the piece with the sound, and it's almost kind of life-size scale. Occasionally, I will show elements of the filming process as a piece in itself. Again, that's something I'll talk about in a minute, but the structures that we make during the filming process, they're very beautiful sometimes, and it's a funny, functional thing, and every aesthetic decision is not an aesthetic decision, it's a totally functional decision, but somehow I really like it visually. So yeah, this has been shown like this before. This was in the Barbican this year. I had a really amazing opportunity of showing this work really large scale in their foyer. It was just really nice, because I spend a lot of time in the Barbican anyway. I do a teaching project that Gretchen mentions that is there, so I spend a lot of time there. It's super, super nice going there and seeing my work. So yeah, it's big. And then the concrete was originally commissioned by the Barbican, but recently I had a chance to show it in Munich in a concrete bunker, which was really cool. This kind of funny hand-drawn diagram is going to be a bit of a theme of this talk. It's just the way that I like to work. So, as Gretchen said, my work somehow fits somewhere in between these three things. And also, as Gretchen said, I came to make the work that I make via a kind of roundabout route. Via science and music. When I was at school, I'm not going to give you a really long history, but just briefly, when I was at school, I was equally split between science, music, and art. And of course, because I could do science, school said, you must go and do science, which I did. But I quite quickly realized that it wasn't enough for me. I wasn't as passionate about it as my sort of peers were. And also I couldn't see any way of connecting it with the other things that I was interested in, which was playing drums and making art. So I left it, and I went to study graphic design. But for sure, I've taken two things really from science with me. It definitely has an impact in my work in terms of the thinking. So the two things are this kind of interest in scientific logic, the designing of an experiment, doing diagrams to kind of organize abstract thought, the idea of testing an idea, figuring out how to design a system that will test a kind of hypothesis, this kind of scientific logic. And also, one module that I did when I was studying biochemistry was quantum physics, and I'm really glad that I left after that, not before, because that was very inspiring to me. I definitely don't make work about that, but just these ideas about, these big ideas about the fundamental nature of reality and time and space and perception, all these kind of things, which are basically artistic ideas anyway, because they're so big and they're so unanswerable, and they're so kind of, the idea of the subjective suddenly coming into science was quite sort of mind-blowing. And so those big ideas kind of carried on being a kind of influence in my work. And then, so while I was studying graphic design, I came upon the world of experimental sound and composition. And that was, I would say, the most inspiring thing that happened to me, because that's been the most influential thing in my work, the world of experimental sound. People using sound as a medium through which you can convey ideas, people using system-based approaches to sound, and also things like this. This was a big moment when I was doing graphic design. Somebody showed me these things. These are 2 pages by a composer called Cornelius Cardew from a piece called Treatise. And these are graphic scores. So I don't know if anyone here has heard of graphic scores, but it's a thing. It's a tool that a lot of composers use, experimental composers maybe, to maybe provide a focus around improvisation or a way of organizing sound over time, sound and material over time. I found this really, really inspiring because I saw that and I saw a beautiful graphic image. And I saw that and I thought, well, you could interpret those in any way. Nobody says you have to interpret that with a sound-making instrument. You know, that could be camera moves, or it could be dance moves, or it could be movements in space. You know, somehow this kind of thing opened up a world of possibilities to me in terms of how I might work with what material I was interested in. So I started to use this kind of science thing to make, so these are really old things, this is when I was like 19 or something. I started figuring out ways to make sound with numbers. I thought anything that you can turn into a number, you can turn into sound. So immediately I was given this I found this sort of system-based approach to creating sound and music. And that opened me up because before I thought, who am I to make music? I don't have any I'm just a drummer, I don't know how to write music, or I don't know how to write a song. But when I figured out that you could make creative work with systems, suddenly it was like, okay, I can do that, and if somebody doesn't like it, it doesn't matter because the system made me do it. So this was I made some pieces of sound from measurements of a park bench, and this was a really sort of crucial project that enabled me to kind of follow this path that led me to here. These were rhythms made from when people were sitting on the bench at certain times. These were the beginning of trying to figure out how to make sound composition from colour. And so taking colours from the landscape, analysing them and finding a way to make sound from that. So that was my kind of score. I worked with a friend, we made a piece. So when I finished my MA, I wanted to make a piece that somehow brought together a few of these things. I was really interested in graphic scores, wanted to make sound. I wanted to work with a sort of process-heavy approach. I wanted to work in real space. I was very sure that I liked working with my hands, doing things in an analog way, working in real space, real time. And I wanted to work in landscape. So I figured out this way of basically working with light. So we've all seen sort of light writing stuff, right? I saw using light as a way to sort of draw in space, but it didn't feel like I wanted to find a sort of technique that would allow me to have a bit more control over those lines of light in space. Because when you see these light writing pictures, it's just very static. You just got the thing, and that's it. And I wanted to be able to control the movement. So I figured out this system, which I'll explain in a minute. And I made this piece, it's called Evensong. Some of you might have seen it if you've seen stuff online, but I'm going to play it anyway. I'll play it to you, and then I will talk about it. So, people often ask when I had made that, well, firstly, how it was made, but why I didn't just make it in post-production, which I could have done. But that was really beside the point. So, I made the work in Scotland. It's a very special place to me. It's a place where we used to have a place, and I spent a lot of my childhood up there. It's on the west coast, and it's very beautiful, as you can see. So I made the piece by moving around this little LED light connected to a battery on these wooden kind of blocks, which acted as guides. So I would sit in the space and move them around like that amongst the actual space. So everything you've seen, all those lights actually really were in those spaces. The circles were made from using a bicycle wheel on a chair. And people are often quite surprised because it looks like quite a slick film, and that's the sort of thing that I always clock that in my head, did it look too slick, It's this sort of slick thing, and actually what's behind it is this super lo-fi kind of experience that I had. Just filming it. So, a huge part of the film is the fact that I invested that time in those spaces. And this has become a really important thing about making my work in general, is that the film, the thing, is only one part of the art. What's gone into it is absolutely as important. It's not just about the final product. So, I got to film in this wonderful place. It was a very magical moment. I was just filming there at one point, and 4 dolphins came bobbing around. It was really, really magical. So, to this question of why didn't I do it in post, the answer is, well, I would never have been able to know exactly what it would look like. I could recreate this thing in post, but actually something interesting happened here, which this is sort of really lo-fi image, but as you can see, when the light is closer to the camera, because of the shutter speed I had it on, because it's close to the camera, it's moving a long distance, relatively long distance, in the same amount of time as one that's at the back. So the one at the back appears smooth, and the one at the front appears in dots. And then that, of course, influenced exactly the sound, because the sound was made to the image. So the image became a kind of graphic score for a sound piece that I made with a friend. And the sound was absolutely following that moment, so it's kind of sound. So this thing of these unforeseen results that are super exciting to me. So, just want to explain with a really dry diagram my little system of how I made this thing. So if you imagine kind of an editing program, like Premiere or After Effects or something, and you imagine I have a piece of footage at the top. Now, what I'm shooting with my camera, I will actually explain this because it's the beginning of this kind of collapsing time thing. What you see on the camera is a tiny little dot just moving around, and that's what you see. So let's say from 0 to 10 seconds, that's just a dot in the dark moving around. So then what I would then do is chop that bit of footage into its individual frames. So one frame, chop it into individual frames, and then take that line of frames and then stack it up, so you've got a stack of time rather than linear time, right? Does that make sense? And then if you have a still image on an editing program, you can have that still image last as long as you want. You can have it for the whole timeline. So then once I have my stack of images, I just sort of extend them out, and by, staggering how each next image comes in, what we have is the forming of that shape. So I could have the whole shape just sitting there, or I could have the shape forming and unforming and reforming. So that was my sort of technique of kind of like putting a time in a stack and then having full control over that. And that was a kind of quite a key thing that I learned to do, and how, like, this idea of looking at this time, this moment in time, as an object. And it's the first time I started thinking about this kind of more poetic reading of the work. Like, I was thinking about the fact that you're seeing these moments in time, and they were real moments in time. That you're seeing them in their entirety, or sort of reforming and unforming in their entirety. I thought there's something quite poetic about that. You know, it's about, you know, it's like the way that you look back at memories. You know, you kind of see them as a whole thing. Or like that saying, the beauty of hindsight. You know, you look back in time and you can kind of perceive the whole thing in a way that you can't when you're right there in it. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting sort of avenue to continue with. And of course, I don't expect that people would necessarily get that whole thing about hindsight and memory and perception and all that kind of stuff from watching the film. But it's not completely without emotion, I think. And maybe that emotion comes from the sound, maybe it comes from the choice of title. But I also like to think that perhaps the way that I like to structure time within a film maybe can be a little bit of a metaphor for how we kind of structure time in our minds, in a way, in terms of memory and looking back and that kind of thing. So when I finished this film, the normal thing that happens to me is when I make a big film, I don't know what to do next, and I get freaked out. And there was a couple of things that came up with the Evensong piece. One was this thing about slick sort of end product, and the sort of bits of the filming thing, that the actual process of filming being this much more hand-done thing, and this beautiful analog lo-fi thing, and then this end product being this slick thing, and I wasn't quite sure about that. But especially, I started having a problem in my own work, not the work that I do with music, but my own work. I started having a problem with making edits, with justifying an edit. Thinking, you know, the Evensong was beautiful because there was this beautiful landscape, and there was all these different shots that I could take in this beautiful landscape. But when I thought about the next piece, I was like, I don't think I can justify another story like that. But I just want to look at this moment in time in itself. And I kind of thought about Evensong as being quite a kind of linear kind of editing structure. One thing follows to the next, to the next, to the next. And I remember having this really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who was talking about experimental music and experimental composition. I'm talking about a kind of linear form of composition, where one phrase would lead on to another phrase, and the next note, next phrase might have a middle eight and a chorus, you know, this kind of thing. This sort of linear structure versus structure that you see more in minimal music, minimal composition, where you have an object, a sound idea or a sound object, and the listener is just basically revolving around that object. This kind of repetition, and you're moving around this thing, and then maybe that thing is gradually evolving over time. But it's a different way of kind of thinking about time and structure. When I thought of that, when you said that, it was just, of course, I just have to do a cycle around something, and I don't have to go from one thing to another thing to another thing. And it was also important because I was also doing work with music at the time, and you know, doing live performance with music, and was working a lot with loops. And I came to understand that a circular loop you can watch forever, but a kind of loop backwards and forwards, you get very bored of it very, very quickly. Or even an elliptical loop, you'd get bored. So a loop where you just forget where the beginning is, you can just watch forever. So I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I made a test piece, and this was really just a little test. But it's just a blue light thing, filmed in my studio, round in a circle. And it's the first time that I kind of came up with the idea of kind of impossible objects, that using like video as a kind of sculptural tool, or making video sculptures, or this kind of sort of language started coming into my head. So then I made a series of them, and I just open that up. I projected them on pieces of glass, so to sort of these pieces of hanging glass, it's relatively thick glass, it's back projected. So that to give them an extra sort of sculptural quality, and I called the show Dimensions Variable, which is a little bit of sort of wordplay on what, you know, if you make an installation, quite often you would say so-and-so installation, dimensions variable, depending on the space. And also the kind of idea of this sort of physicsy kind of dimensions, because in a way, this is going to sound really stupid, but I was kind of thinking, okay, we've got 3 dimensions plus time makes 4 dimensions, and then I'm sort of compressing time back into the 3 dimensions and then putting it on 2 dimensions. Anyway, whatever, it's not actual science, but it's just what I was thinking. So that's why I called it that. And it was the first time I also really started displaying the physical things. So you'd see this kind of constructed film where you have the object as a constructed thing, and you have its actual concrete, real thing next to it, which was quite nice. And again, all the decisions of these things, they're just totally functional decisions, but they look really nice. So now I'm going to talk about thereafter. What I want to do is talk about thereafter. Shall I just try and hold you in a concrete piece? Hopefully it won't take too long. I'm going to spend most time on this, because this was a really, really important piece of work for me, and it was basically the beginning of really finding a kind of sense of identity with my own work. Anyway, so in 2011 I was given this amazing opportunity. I was commissioned by these really interesting people in Holland who were running a series of projects called Open Mind, which brought together scientists and artists for no other reason than to encourage discussion, cross-pollination maybe, no agenda, which was really nice. They just wanted us to talk and share. So I was put together with a quantum physicist, so she's a theoretical high-energy physicist, and an organic chemist, which was a super brilliant fit, which I'll talk about in a minute. It was just the best project ever, you know, getting this chance to have these conversations with these people and make work in a really quite free environment. You know, there was no pressure on us to make something amazing, and there was just pressure to talk. And we were asked to make a work about the idea of families. Now, because I had a bit of experience in science, my first thought that was what I definitely didn't want to do, which was talking about families as in groupings of things. Now in science, you often talk about families as in how you categorize things, families of animals and plants and all these kind of things. And that was just kind of really what I wasn't interested in. What I wanted to do was get to something more abstract. So straight away I thought, well, what is family? What does it mean? What does it feel like? You know, and I thought it said the bonds. It's just a bond. It's an invisible bond. And then we got, so of course then that sort of led on to bonds between, you know, the forces of the universe, the things that keep everything together. Bonds between subnuclear particles, bonds between molecules, bonds between people, all of it. So we very quickly, we very quickly agreed that we wanted to sort of get into this area of the four fundamental forces, electromagnetism, gravitas, blah, 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 all those things. You can read it, I'll get tongue-tied. And look into those as scientific things, but also as sort of metaphors for human experience. So it's always very important that we're talking about these scientific things, but at the same time, we're kind of talking metaphorically about human experience. So we started off this whole process of talking. That's what we did for some time. We met up in this cabin in the woods in Holland, and we drank coffee, and we just shared about our practice, which was really inspiring. It was just, without any sort of focus, we would just Elizabeth, who was the quantum physicist, was just talking about her research and the kind of ideas that she was working with, which was pretty mind-bending. And Ryan was talking about his work with sort of chemical reactions and organic chemistry and materials. He brought this super enthusiasm for materials and fire and stuff, and these cool experiments that you could do with stuff, and it felt really, really fun. I don't know what this means, but these are the kind of things. These are the kind of things that we were looking at, right? I wanted to show you these because I think they kind of fed in somehow into this thing of how we're kind of thinking about time and space. Just looking at these kind of things, oh, what does that mean? What can you make of these things? It's sort of mad. It's just, you know. And at one point, I drew in my sketchbook this thing, and I didn't make anything from it. It's just, for me, it was interesting to look at this kind of inspiration and go, okay, wait. If you imagine the thing on the left, if you imagine that's an animation on a screen of a dot going from bottom left to top right corner, just an animation of a dot going like that. Now, if you imagine that animation as a flick book, you know what a flick book is, right? You go like that. Now then, if you imagine that flick book and you put it sideways and you open it out, and then if you connect with a piece of string every dot. So I didn't make anything from this really, but I suppose what I was interested in is like, how do you find a way to follow a different route through time, basically. So we carried on these discussions, kind of getting closer to something. Talking about chemical reactions. Obviously, Ryan is an organic chemist. He spends his time making and breaking bonds. That's what happens in a chemical reaction. We looked at all sorts of other things, which I'm not going to try and explain. We looked at particle collision imagery. We were looking at sort of, I think it just CERN, the Large Hadron Collider thing, had just kind of been opened. I can't remember exactly, but it was quite recent. So we're looking at these kind of circular images and particle collisions and all this kind of stuff. Just want to point out a nice list there. Ryan's list of things that blow up well. Apple, jelly, hamburger, peach. We didn't do that, but yeah, thought that was quite nice. Yeah, keeping going, just talking, doing diagrams. Some of the diagrams were from what the scientists were saying, some of it was what we were saying, you know, this kind of stuff. And we finally got to this point where we decided we wanted to design a big kind of experiment. Not a real science experiment, but a so-called experiment that would use the video camera as a tool to look at something that is going through a process of change. So it's also worth saying at this point that 6 months before getting this project, I'd lost my mum. And when I was asked to do a project about families, I just thought, I don't want to do a project about families, it's too close. But then I sort of thought about it a little bit more, and I thought, well, families is this bond. And the funny thing is that I was feeling that sense of family in a really, really strong way, in a way that I'd never felt it before, because I took it for granted. I had it, I wasn't aware of it, but I was certainly aware of it when I lost it. And that's when I thought, well, maybe if you're trying to show about the strength of connections, and you're talking about this idea of bonds, and you're trying to show about the strength of bonds, how do you show a strength of bond? When you like put a magnet and put two things together and you're like, wee, that's really strong. Well, maybe actually you need to break it and see what happens. Sometimes you can show something in a more strong way by doing it in its opposite. So we decided that we were going to do these things and that would be somehow to do with breaking a bond. And we would use this filming system to look at it and really look at it. So yeah, came up with this system. Huge circle on the floor, 200 camera positions. So you have to remember this was done on a really low budget. So we only had one camera. So 200 camera positions, about 10 meters wide in diameter. And we would have a thing going off in the middle, something happening in the middle. We chose 3 elements: water, explosions, and wood. So 3 things that we were able to create a moment of drama. So 3 things that would happen, there was something that would happen. And what we did was, I'll show you. So that was our sort of filming system, and that's it in real life. So this was shot with this was the water. So what we did was we made 200 water balloons, quite like big ones. And so we would set the water balloon in the middle, set it up, put the camera in place, get the shot ready, get everything aligned, burst the water balloon, water would drop, we'd capture that whole thing in video, then reset a new balloon, move the camera, do it again. Reset, move the camera, do it again. This was on the roof of my old studio. No, not my old studio. This is the roof of my studio. My studio is up just up there. We didn't tell our landlords we were doing it, but So there's some funny making of stuff here. Basically, we could only get to our roof by climbing over the kitchen sink and down the ladder, which is kind of ridiculous when we have all this equipment and we're out there for like 8 hours filming. But I love it. I love the process of doing this thing, and it's like this super intense kind of meditation. Because once you start with a process like this, you can't stop because the light will change. So you have to just be super focused, and it can take 8 hours, but you've got to just do it. And afterwards, you have this like wonderful feeling of like, what have we got? Have we got something? And when you finally get to just do a little bit of post-production just to put it all together, it's the most exciting feeling in the world, because it's like it's opening the best Christmas present, because you've done this super like long, intensive bit of work, and then you get to see what you've made, because you can't see what you've made when you're making it. So that was my bursting device, which is a stick with a scalpel on it. These little balloons. Okay, so the explosions were fireworks. And obviously, well, that's the only one that we couldn't film in London. We had to film out of London, because basically we were setting off outdoor fireworks indoors, which is really loud. So this was a set building company that I'd worked with before. They make sets for the Royal Opera House. They had this big space in Cambridge, and I was like, can I come and set off 200 explosions inside? And they're like, yeah, sure. And we've got a caravan you can stay in as well, which is really cool. So that was us. We had to sort of protect the camera. That was the explosion. It was making the explosions because we had to use fireworks. And so luckily I had a friend who has qualifications in pyrotechnics, and she came along and helped with it. What she had to do was take out the bit of the firework that makes it go up. So we just got the explosion bit without the up bit. It looked well dodgy, I must say. Like from the outside of that caravan, it looked like we were doing something really bad. But those were our explosions. And this was us hiding from the explosions. Because we'd have to set the camera off, set the sound, set everything rolling, set off the thing, and there wasn't time to get out of the door. So we just had to sort of hide behind this board. So when you see the film, and you see a green thing, you'll see it going round, look out for a board, and just imagine everybody behind there. So this is in my old studio. Oh, I'm getting a bit tight for time, aren't I? We had to break in to my old studio. We had to get a generator. So basically, we put a generator in, but we also had to get some more power. So my old studio is across the road from my current studio, so we had to climb onto the roof and throw power cables across. And that was me catching it, and I'm a bit scared of heights, so that was a bit scary. Just making the sticks. So I was up on the beam, just dropping them, and we were filming. So I don't think that might be the last one. Okay. Then quickly, what do I end up with after doing all this filming? Well, I end up with 200 pieces of footage from different camera angles of something happening. And it's best to imagine it with the explosions. So if you imagine the explosion happening, it happens in the middle, and it explodes out. And that takes a certain amount of time, let's say 5 seconds. So then, if you imagine 200 of those, this is just kind of visualizing how I like to think about how I work with the footage. So I have 200 explosions from different camera angles, all starting in the middle and ending on the outside. What I then do is I stack those up, and then I can go round in space, around different moments of time. So I can take all the bits that look similar from every single camera angle at 4 seconds. So I can move around at 4 seconds. And then I can take all the bits that look similar at 3 seconds, and I can move around at 3 seconds, and then I can move around at 2 seconds. Does this make sense? So you've got all these sort of moments, and you can kind of cut a path through. And it felt like making a sculpture in a way. It felt like kind of sculpting these frames into making these objects. So yeah, coming back to this flash point at 0 seconds, which is just the moment where the explosion is starting, and then letting it go real time for a moment and back to the beginning. You'll see that. I'm going to show you like very, very short amount of the explosions one, just so that you can make the connection straight away. But you can see it in there, so I won't spend much time on it. That's right at the end. You just go around that moment right at the end. I'm going to fast forward now. That's, wow. And that's the flash. Then, a few years after that, so I, with that thing thereafter, loads and loads of events and one camera. And I got a commission from Dolby. It's it's not a huge amount of money, but it's more money than I've worked with in the past. So obviously, I had to do it the other way round. So I got to do some explosions with bullet time, which was really, really fun. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just want to show you the process a bit and talk about what it means. So this time I went to a pyrotechnist specialist and I said, this is the kind of explosion I want. And he said, yep, well, that's really easy. It's just gunpowder in a piece of cling film, which is like plastic film with a fuse stuck in it. So it actually had no explosive force. It just went into a really beautiful kind of shape that's all lit up from the inside. It's very beautiful. So I could have just used one, but then I thought, oh, I may as well have a few. I had about 10 explosions. Some of them worked better than others. And so in the end, I got about 7 or 8 good ones. So this was 96 cameras. That's the most I could possibly get. I was really lucky that I contacted this bullet time company. And now they do high-end commercial shoots or shoots for movies, and that their kind of budget is like £10,000 a day. Obviously, I didn't have anything like that kind of money, but they were just in between projects and they wanted to do something experimental. So I was super lucky that I caught them at this moment where they were up for just working experimentally and doing this kind of weird thing. We also did glass and water, which is just a health and safety nightmare, really. I was very lucky to know these people that had a warehouse in Manchester, and I said, can I bring in like 10,000 watts of light and loads of electricity and do explosions and throw water and glass around? And I said, yeah, brilliant, definitely can do that. So I was really lucky because without that, there's no way we could have made this. Just recording sound. That's my assistant, Paolo. He's very important in this work. That was us throwing glass. So yeah, those are all like shards of glass and we're throwing them around. Okay, so what we've got from that, I'll show you very quickly because again, you can see it next door. A very different feeling to it. Show little bits. Yeah. Okay, so whereas the previous piece with lots of events in one camera had this energy to it, it's dynamic and struggling, this kind of struggle of this moment of change. This is really different. It's much more sculptural, it's much more contemplative in a way. And so the idea became really different. The idea was about, rather than looking at this moment of change, it is looking at a moment of change, but it's more like doing everything I possibly can to try and stop this change, to try and hold on to a moment in time which we know that we can't do. So it was, there was a sort of internal question that I had when I got the opportunity to work with bullet time, because we all know bullet time, we've seen it in the Matrix, it's a kind of movie thing that we all know. I was like, is this the right thing or is that a weird thing for me to do? I mean, my work's always been so lo-fi and then suddenly I'm like, I've got all the cameras and all the light and all the stuff. It's like, is that a bit wrong? And I thought, actually no, because maybe there's something really kind of beautifully futile about it, about doing as much as we possibly can, all the equipment, to just try and hold on to this little moment in time, to try and film a bit of smoke, or some water, or with the concrete one that I'll show you in a sec, some dust. These things are usually pointed at Hollywood actors and these commercial things, and we're doing all this just to look at these funny little ephemeral moments. kind of thought, when I thought that, I thought, oh, maybe that's okay. It's all right then. And so it's this thing about really trying to hold on to this moment in time. And it's to do with, I'll put this up and maybe we can look at it another time. There's not really time to look at it now, but one second. It's just wanting to kind of go back and hold on to this thing which was beautiful. And in a way, it's a kind of a metaphor for how we yearn for the impossible, in a way. You know, I think we all must do it in a couple of ways. There's a seduction that we as humans have for these things that are impossible. And I think I can talk about that in two ways. One in terms of memory and loss and time. And, you know, we all grow old and we can't stop that. And we all lose people and we can't stop that. But yet we kind of wish we wouldn't, and we kind of wish we didn't. And we kind of wish, there's this wish that, you know, you can go back to that moment. Maybe there was a memory that's a very beautiful memory and you can hold on to it for a moment and revel in it for a moment. But you can't have it. Which is quite a kind of melancholy thing in a way, but it's also that it's supposed to be beautiful because these things are actual beautiful moments in time. And there's another side of this sort of yearning for the impossible thing, which is a much simpler version, which is that, like, who hasn't looked out of a plane and really wished we could just go and have a little walk in the clouds? I mean, I certainly have. And I've certainly wanted to hold a bit of a cloud in my hand. I've even talked to sound designers about, if only we could just pick up that sound and just hold that sound, like, in the cup of your hand. And these things that you know it's ridiculous to even entertain that thought, but you still do. And there's a kind of satisfaction when you do that. And you can read this or you cannot read it. I'm certainly not going to read it out loud because I'll make a fool of myself. But when I came to titling the work, as you might be able to tell, I quite like these kind of poetic titles that kind of suggest the more emotional part of the work. And I took the title for this work, Shall I This Time Hold You, from one of the translations of the beginning of Goethe's Faust. And it's quite interesting, the different translations have different kind of feelings to it. And I remember talking to a German person, I was talking about that, and she was like, oh yeah, you know, in the dedication, he's just saying, moment, don't go, because you're so beautiful, please stay. And in this, I feel like it's kind of more, I mean, I don't know, it's not the whole thing anyway, and I'm not authoritative on that at all. But I feel like this is kind of talking about that yearning, that sort of futile, torturous yearning for things that are gone and wanting to go back there, that being tempted to go back there, but knowing that you can't. And I think it kind of sums up that kind of work, that side of the work a bit well, quite well. But remember that, you know, I'm not necessarily saying that the work is about that. It might be for you, it might not be. But it is also about just that, these impossible objects, which I find really exciting to be able to capture. Because I wouldn't, you know, they are themselves and they're very beautiful. And there's something interesting about, you know, this one, I chose that one because it looks really like a cloud. There's something really interesting about scale and weight and solidity. Like so the ones that are on the posters around here, to me they look like they're made out of porcelain. They don't look like they're clouds. They look like if I was to pick it up and drop it, it would kind of smash on the floor rather than go puff like some air. And I really love that about them, and that's why I really like making these kind of time sculptures. I think I'm not gonna actually show the next work, I'm just going to talk very quickly about the concrete piece, which is the most recent thing, which you will see over there. Again, I was commissioned by the Barbican to do this piece that you've just seen. It was originally commissioned by Dolby, but then the Barbican asked to show it. And then they also asked if I wanted to make a new piece, and I suggested that I did a kind of bullet time concrete one. Because the Barbican, if anyone has ever been there, I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. It's a big brutalist concrete building. It's a very famous building, and it's all made out of concrete. So I thought, hey, what about I make you one and bullet time concrete thing. So we went back to Manchester, and this time worked with concrete, which is basically the cement dust. It's the most difficult thing that you can film. You're trying to film something moving very fast that's dust. It's just not a very good filming situation. So we had to put like a ridiculous amount of light and push the cameras really hard, and luckily I had a really good team and we were able to capture it really well. Cement is a really, really delicious material to work with, because if you put your hand on that, it's like, it feels like cream. It's like really smooth, but if you throw it in the air, it's dust. It's also a very dangerous material to be working with. So. I'll come back to this picture in a minute. What we noticed when we were filming, we were throwing the concrete or the cement and pointing all this light right in the middle at it. And we realized how much it looked like the moon, because I guess the moon is, the surface of the moon, maybe thousands, millions, billions of years of dust gradually falling. That's what I figured anyway. I'm not saying that's true. But it really looked like the moon, and that was really nice. So, yeah, you're going to go and see that piece, I hope. What you'll see over there is a kind of expanded version. Now, strangely, coming kind of full circle back to the Evensong piece, actually I have made this piece, which is called How We Fall, as a film. So it actually does have a dynamic arc. It has different shots, because the bullet time that we saw for the explosions, the gunpowder explosions, all the cameras are firing at the same time. You know, we set off the explosion, they all go bam at the same time. Now, when we did this one, we were able to add this new technique, which was really fun, but made it then more difficult to edit with, which was we did some shots where they all went off at the same time, and then we did some shots where the cameras were firing sequentially. So the cameras go like the fastest we had them going was 4 milliseconds apart. So super fast. But we could also then just say, oh, maybe we want it a bit slower. So sometimes we got it when we went like that. So we were able to do these sort of kind of weird time moves. So then you get this kind of bullet time slow motion thing around. You're moving whilst something's slightly moving, which is really fun. But then it made I couldn't do my kind of purist loop because I've got different shots. So I made a film out of it. I struggled a bit with how to actually do it. This was us making sound. So I always am really clear that the sound has to, in this body of work where I'm working with physical materials, the sound has to come from the material itself. It's not an added thing. So the sound in the piece was all made from concrete. And this was us recording the sound. So we're just making a load of sound recordings and then use that to create sound. So what I had to do actually was stand on a scaffold rig and get really good at aiming really well. So throwing, I would have to draw a line visually in the cross and find the middle and aim for that point, which I managed to do quite well. Just quickly what this piece is about. I don't want to really say what this piece is about. It's called How We Fall. It was actually a piece that I made originally, well, it's a version of a piece I made in 2012, which was also commissioned by the Barbican. So again, it was in reference to the concrete of the Barbican. That's what the Barbican looks like. But, again, I was working with these kind of time things, these moments of time and these looking back and having these certain feelings. And I think at the time when I made that piece, I was thinking about falling. I was thinking about we fall, or who falls, or governments and humans fall. And that becomes part of the text that I write. And I think of that action of falling or feeling like you're falling and wanting to be caught. And I think that's what I was making the piece about then. Now, when I came to film this piece, the sort of political climate is different. And there was a moment when I thought, is this a bit weird to be using this kind of imagery? And I had a good think about it, and I decided to continue with it. But it is whatever you take from it. For me, it's kind of a personal thing of a kind of pure kind of idea, but I'm not unaware of what other connotations the work has, and you may take from that what you will. This was something that came up during filming. This is Mars. This was another side of it, to do with scale and space, which you hopefully see. And these are some pictures of the moon and the footprints. And that was our one. I feel like I've gone on enough time, and that it's best to cut it there, and you can watch the film over there. I was going to show you a little bit of this film in its original format, but you can see its sort of expanded version there. And if you are interested to see the film in the sort of edited version, it is on my website that you can have a look. So thank you very much for having me.
So I do want to open it up to maybe just a couple of questions. This hand came up first, but I'm definitely going to leave time for us all to go to the galleries and still talk. So I'm sorry if we missed your question in advance.
Thanks, Sophie. I wanted to ask about the role that failure might play in your work, given your background in science, and in science with experimentation and testing hypotheses, that oftentimes those things don't work out. I'm wondering how failure might inform, or at least iteration might inform the process.
Failure is terrifying to me, but I suppose it depends on how you define failure. So I would always work on a series of experiments and tests, and try and what I try and work with is this balance of success and failure. And it depends how you term, like I said, how you term failure. I don't know, but I like to think that I work with chance more than failure. Obviously, if you're setting up a thing like that, you can't fail, and that's really scary. You can't spend that much money and it go wrong. And there's always a feeling that you have, with these kind of work, there's a feeling where you have to just trust your gut and trust that it's going to be okay, because there's always the question of failure. You never know what you're going to get. You can't look at it as you're making it. So, science experiments, scientific progress is made through testing and trying and failing and refining, and I suppose that's how I would try and get to a kind of good relationship with success and failure through that process of testing and failing and tweaking. Does that make sense? Maybe it's not the kind of answer that you expected.
Right, and then I'll take one from this side. There was one on this side?
Hi, thank you. That was a really great lecture. One thing that I wanted to know about more, at the beginning of your lecture, you talked a lot about process and how that process is really important of like kind of being there alone and doing it very analog. And then later you move into this, you have bigger budgets. So before you were talking about how much process was important, and I get that from like the artist perspective, but I was wondering if you could talk more about how that influenced the work. And then secondly, when you move to like the bigger budgets, when you have more cameras and a team, if that process influenced the work or changed it, or?
What do you mean, like how the process influenced the work in general when I'm making stuff on my own?
Yeah, so like you're talking about how much it was important, and I didn't know if it was like just important to you or if it like influenced the work.
Oh yeah. Okay. So like it's all important. It's yes, conceptually it's important to me that I was really there, but also like aesthetically, you know, you're in a space and it's like this thing of you have a plan, right? Make a plan for the experiment or the filming, and you try and follow that plan as tightly as you possibly can, but knowing that you're always going to have to make changes. There's always going to be things that make you go a slightly different direction, whether that's weather or wind or something or responding in that moment. So it's this sort of lovely balance of being a total perfectionist, but being really open to chance that happens in your environment. And so that's where it's really ingrained. So like I wouldn't be able to make work a different way. I wouldn't be able to go like, this is the end object, and I'll sort of create it. It has to come through the process, it has to like be born out of the process. And when I work with sort of bigger budgets, it's really exactly the same thing. It's quite a small group of people that I work with. And we all go through this super intense thing together. I mean, you know, on those days in Manchester, we were filming sometimes 20 hours a day, and then going back to sleep in, you know, in these sort of dorm places, which was really nice. But you're in it. You're all in it, and that's all you're doing, and it's a really exciting experience. And so the work, again, you're super focused, but you're responding because you don't know. You know, you're always open to these sort of chance things and taking things a slightly different way as it comes along. Does that kind of answer it?
I think, yeah. Well, I just want to have a chance for a real small question. Okay, last one.
I just want to know what's the best advice you can give young students and older like me, non-traditional students going forward in the future?
Find the thing that really interests you. I mean, find a thing that you love doing and do that. I mean, quite often my students come along and they think they have to make a certain kind of work, or they think maybe they've got interests outside the work that they have to keep as interests outside the work. And I always try and tell my students that maybe it wouldn't work out, but maybe those things that you're interested in, just because you are, because it makes you feel nice, maybe sometimes those things are what can end up defining the sort of direction of your work. I don't know, I mean, this doesn't work for everybody, but yeah, finding a love for the things that you do and following it and you know, asking yourself, finding a balance where you're asking yourself the right kind of critical questions, giving yourself enough of a hard time at the same time as not feeling bad, and just trying things out and testing them, refining things and finding some kind of feedback between your work and yourself and finding those satisfying moments in your work. Is that? Yeah.
That was a good question to end on, I think. So thank you. Okay, let's give it up for Sophie one more time. Please, everybody.